when the HOA Karen called the cops on me for simply parking my own cars. I didn't argue. I made a power move she never saw coming. It started with a simple complaint to many cars parked in the driveway and along the curb. The homeowners association claimed it was a violation of the community guidelines. On paper, it sounded like an attempt to keep the neighborhood orderly. In reality, it became a power struggle fueled by personal agendas and pettiness. The so-called problem wasn't traffic obstruction, noise complaints, or anything that disrupted the peace. The vehicles were legally parked, registered, and well-maintained, but that didn't matter. What mattered to a certain HOA board member, someone infamous in the neighborhood for overstepping boundaries, was that things weren't done her way. Official letters started arriving, citing vague rules about excessive vehicle presence. Each letter escalated in tone, from friendly reminders to formal warnings. None of them clearly stated how many cars were considered too many, nor did they provide specific details on which rule had been broken. The vagueness was deliberate, a tactic used to exert control without accountability. Soon, other neighbors began whispering about the situation, not because they were bothered, but because they had seen the same behavior before. Anyone who didn't conform to the unwritten standards set by this HOA enforcer eventually became a target. This wasn't about preserving the neighborhood's aesthetics, it was about dominance. The issue intensified when the HOA began using community meetings as a platform to criticize specific homeowners without naming them directly. Phrases like "some residents don't respect the parking rules" were thrown around, always with passive-aggressive undertones. It wasn't hard to read between the lines. The intention was to publicly shame and isolate, hoping peer pressure would do the rest. Despite attempts to clarify the rules or seek a compromise, the HOA remained uncooperative. Requests for documentation or explanations were met with vague references to community standards or discretionary decisions by the board. There was no transparency, only control. What stood out most wasn't the rule enforcement, but the personal vendetta behind it. The complaints didn't stem from multiple board members, they consistently came from one source. A woman often dubbed Karen by residents due to her history of micromanaging everything from trash bins to lawn heights. Her influence over the HOA board allowed her to weaponize the rules as she saw fit, turning the organization into a tool for her personal agenda. At its core, this wasn't about parking, it was about power. It was about one individual's obsession with control, disguised under the pretense of community order. The warning letters, the escalating tone, the veiled public shaming all pointed to a pattern of behavior designed to harass and intimidate, not resolve. The situation had gone beyond inconvenience. It had become a symbol of something bigger. How small authority, when unchecked, can turn into a tool of oppression. And at that point it was clear responding with logic or reason wouldn't work. Something more decisive had to be done. Escalation is often the hallmark of someone losing control. After weeks of passive-aggressive notes, vague threats, and hollow warnings from the HOA, the situation reached its peak. With no legitimate rule to enforce and no cooperation from other residents who refused to support her claims, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer decided to take matters to the extreme by involving law enforcement. A non-emergency call was placed, alleging suspicious or possibly illegal parking activity. The accusation wasn't grounded in fact, but served one purpose: to intimidate, by framing the situation as something requiring police attention. The goal was to create a public spectacle, send a message, and hopefully provoke fear or embarrassment. This was not a matter of public safety. There were no blocked fire lanes, no unregistered vehicles, no disturbances of any kind, but the tactic was effective in its intent to apply pressure. A visit from law enforcement, regardless of the outcome, carries weight. It shifts the narrative from a petty disagreement to an official matter, even if the complaint itself is unfounded. For someone hungry for authority, this was a last-ditch effort to assert dominance. HOA rules alone weren't enough. Public shame hadn't worked. So the next move was to elevate the conflict to a legal level, hoping to force compliance through fear. The response from law enforcement was measured and neutral. No violations were found, no tickets were issued, no laws had been broken. But the impact of the visit lingered, not because of any wrongdoing, but because of what it represented: an abuse of systems meant to serve the public. What had once been a neighborhood disagreement over the number of parked vehicles was now a clear example of harassment disguised as civic concern. Involving the police not only wasted public resources but also revealed the lengths to which some individuals are willing to go to maintain control over others. Neighbors took notice. Many began questioning the integrity of the HOA's leadership. While most were unwilling to get directly involved, support started shifting quietly. The community wasn't blind to what was happening. This wasn't the first time a neighbor had been targeted under similar pretenses. The tactic of calling the police, once seen as a trump card, backfired in subtle but powerful ways. It exposed the pettiness, the manipulation, and the willingness to distort authority to settle personal grievances. It painted a clear picture of someone so obsessed with control that she was willing to weaponize public institutions for her own agenda. The decision to call the cops marked a turning point. It stopped being about cars or compliance. It became a matter of principle. When rules are applied unevenly, and when authority is misused for personal satisfaction, it creates a fracture in trust, and that fracture was growing wider by the day. The incident didn't result in fines or penalties, but it lit a fire. A quiet realization emerged. It was no longer enough to comply, it was time to take back control. When petty power games escalate into personal attacks, they often reveal unexpected opportunities. While the HOA continued to obsess over technicalities and overreach its limited authority, the underlying structure of the community revealed surprising weaknesses, one that could be leveraged with the right strategy. The nearby parking lot, previously thought to be common or city-owned property, was actually held privately and had recently gone up for sale. Most overlooked it. It was just pavement, a simple stretch of asphalt serving residents, guests, and local businesses. But with ownership came control. Legal rights over access, rules, and enforcement would shift entirely to the new title holder. It wasn't just land, it was leverage. Securing the lot wasn't about retaliation, it was about reclaiming autonomy. With the stroke of a pen and a smart investment, what was once a tool used against someone became a weapon for reclaiming power. No more arbitrary rules, no more letters, no more threats disguised as neighborhood standards. Control transferred hands legally, decisively, and irreversibly. Ownership allowed for customized rules of use. Designated spaces could now be assigned. Unauthorized vehicles could be removed. Signage could be installed. Restrictions could be defined, and security could be implemented, all under private authority, independent of the HOA's influence. Every action was now grounded in legal right, not community pressure. The HOA, once eager to police every perceived infraction, now found itself powerless. The board's ability to enforce rules didn't extend to private commercial property. They couldn't dictate how it was managed, who could park there, or what rules applied. What had been a gray area was now black and white, protected by deed, property law, and clear boundary lines. The move sent shockwaves through the community. Not through confrontation, but through precision. Control had shifted, not by argument, but by ownership. And ownership changed everything. The individual who once received warnings now held the keys to the very place those warnings targeted. The parking lot became more than a place to park, it became a symbol of reversed power dynamics. What had been used to shame and harass now stood as a reminder that true authority comes not from petty rules, but from action backed by law. The HOA had no response. Their tactics had relied on assumption, on the belief that most wouldn't fight back, let alone take strategic steps to undermine their influence. The purchase of a lot exposed that flaw in thinking. Power, when abused, invites resistance, and sometimes that resistance comes in the form of a contract and a property title. This wasn't about a grudge, it was about making a point. Control is fragile when it's rooted in ego, but ownership, rights, and action, that's the kind of power that can't be bullied, voted out, or silenced at a meeting. The rules had changed. Permanently. Ownership brings authority, and with authority comes the ability to enforce new boundaries. Once the parking lot became private property, every inch of it could be managed under the terms set by its legal owner. No longer a shared or contested space, it transformed into a zone of complete control, free from HOA oversight or interference. The first step was formalizing new parking policies. Clear signage was installed, stating that the lot was private and subject to specific terms of use. Unauthorized vehicles would be towed. Permits were required for regular access. Surveillance measures were outlined and fully compliant with local laws. Everything was legal, enforceable, and unmistakably under new management. Priority access was granted to residents and local businesses who had been negatively affected by the HOA's overreach in the past. People who had kept quiet, who had endured the same micromanagement and power plays, were now welcomed. They understood what was happening and respected the change. For the first time, they had a space that operated outside the HOA's influence, a refuge from arbitrary rules and selective enforcement. One key detail stood out. Several individuals associated with the HOA, including the one known for her aggressive behavior, were formally denied access. Their vehicles were flagged in the system, and their attempts to park were now subject to immediate enforcement. This wasn't personal, it was a consequence of their actions. The same rules they once twisted against others were now being applied to them, lawfully and without exception. The individual who once wielded HOA power to shame and pressure others now faced a simple, non-negotiable reality. Access was revoked. No more lectures, no more threats, no more pretending to represent the neighborhood's best interests while targeting people for personal reasons. The parking lot was off-limits. Word spread quickly. Residents took notice, not because of public announcements, but because of visible change. For years, the HOA had operated with impunity, leveraging fear and manipulation to control minor aspects of people's lives. But now, one of their strongest tools, parking, was no longer in their hands, and the most vocal enforcer of those tactics had lost her footing completely. Attempts to protest or challenge the new rules were ineffective. Legal documents were in order. Local authorities recognized the lot as privately owned. Any dispute was shut down before it could begin. There was nothing left to argue, only rules to follow. This shift didn't just restrict access, it shattered the illusion of power the HOA had built over time. The message was clear: authority rooted in control can be taken away, but authority rooted in ownership cannot be ignored. Control is fragile when it relies on intimidation. Real power is quiet, lawful, and irreversible. The parking lot, once a tool of harassment, had become a monument to strategic resistance. The ban wasn't just symbolic, it was a statement. Those who misuse power will eventually face the consequences when the game changes and the rules no longer serve them. Control often disguises itself as concern. Those who seek power in small communities frequently wrap their intentions in phrases like maintaining standards or protecting property values. In reality, these terms are often used to suppress individuality and enforce conformity. The real goal isn't order, it's dominance, and those targeted by such behavior are usually expected to comply silently. But compliance isn't the only option. There are smarter, more strategic ways to respond, ways that don't involve direct confrontation or emotional outbursts. Systems built on intimidation and manipulation collapse quickly when met with informed resistance and well-executed actions. The key lies in understanding the rules better than those who misuse them and turning those rules into tools for empowerment. Retaliation may feel satisfying, but strategy achieves results. Instead of reacting impulsively, choosing to analyze the situation and identify a pressure point leads to meaningful change. In this case, the parking situation became a weapon only because others allowed it to be one. Reclaiming control didn't require a fight. It required initiative, legal ownership, and a shift in the balance of power. Bullies often rely on the assumption that others won't push back. They depend on apathy, fear, or lack of knowledge. When that assumption is proven wrong, their influence crumbles. Once exposed and neutralized, the tactics that once seemed intimidating are revealed as weak and ineffective. Taking ownership both literally and metaphorically represents a higher form of resistance. It bypasses the need for validation or approval from those who seek to dominate. Instead, it establishes a new foundation where control is earned, not imposed. Real authority comes from action, not position. It's not about titles or board seats, it's about results. The consequences of standing up are not always immediate, but they are lasting. One decisive move can set off a chain reaction, inspiring others to challenge unfair treatment and question the legitimacy of those in power. It creates an example proof that those who act smart, stay calm, know their rights can change the narrative. Empowerment begins when fear ends. When people understand their options, their rights, and the systems around them, they no longer feel trapped. The illusion of control that oppressors depend on dissolves when faced with knowledge, ownership, and resilience. This isn't just a story of reclaiming a parking lot. It's a reminder that quiet strength, smart decisions, and legal action often speak louder than confrontation. Those who seek to control others through intimidation will always underestimate the power of strategy in the end. The most effective way to deal with power-hungry individuals is not to match their energy but to outmaneuver them, because when the game is played on your terms, their rules no longer matter. Subscribe to our channel ExposeHOAKaren for more savage takedowns of HOA tyranny. Don't miss what we reveal next.